Welcome everybody in class and welcome everybody online. Reading a comment real quick. Great. Okay, so today I'm going to do a really brief introduction because we have two speakers and limited time as always. So I'm going to want to get to those speakers as quickly as possible. Those two speakers are Dr. Erin Silva and Mark Doudlah. I'll do some brief introductions for both right now, and then we'll first hear from Erin, followed by Mark. So Dr. Erin Silva is an assistant professor in plant pathology here at UW-Madison, focuses broadly on organic agricultural production, including vegetables, row crops, and pasture, so a broad diversity throughout the state. So as Wisconsin's organic and sustainable cropping systems specialist, he consults in our state, but also travels far and wide, internationally as well as all over the country. She's a deep well of knowledge and experience in many different fields, but today she'll be covering one particular topic, and that is organic cover crop-based reduced tillage crop production, primarily soybeans. Something we've talked a lot about, but today we're going to be able to really dial down into. She's been working on this for almost a decade, so she has a lot of experience doing a lot of trials, and has also worked with Mark Doudlah, the farmer who will be speaking after Erin. And Mark is a third-generation farmer from Evansville, Wisconsin. Recently transitioned 1,600 acres or so to organic production. He's got a variety of credentials, including graduating from here, from W-Madison, as an agricultural engineer. He's also a forward-thinking and innovative farmer, diving headlong into organic production, diversifying rotations, including dry beans and cover crops, updating his machinery and implements to explore some of the strategies that Erin will be describing, and Mark will also be sharing his own experiences with cover crop-based reduced till. So without further ado, we're going to begin with Erin.
Thanks, Anders, and I'll be going through this pretty quickly in the realizing that time is short, but we'll have time for questions at the end. So as Anders said, I've been working for the past, 8 years or so, looking at using cover crops to reduce tillage in organic production systems, really working off of Rodale's model with the Roller-Crimper. Before I get into that, though, I just want to touch upon some of the discussion that we've had throughout the other sessions with respect to yield potential of organic systems, where we see the yield drag, as well as some of the profitability parameters in organic. So this is data off of our Wisconsin Integrated Cropping Systems trial. That trial is located at the UW Ag Research Station in Arlington, Wisconsin. And in that trial, we have 6 different systems. 4 of them represent conventionally managed systems, such as continuous corn and a corn-soybean rotation that are managed as per UW recommendations, best management practices. But we also have a couple different organic rotations in there. One of them is a cash grain rotation that involves corn into soybean into a winter wheat with some cover crops mixed in there as well. So we have 25 years worth of data that tracks how organic is performing versus conventional. So 25 years of continuous organic production. So this data really, I think, highlights some of the aspects that some of our speakers have been touching upon. This shows right here the yields of corn in organic and conventional systems. So organic here and conventional here. And what we see is that in organic systems, in normal spring, so compare the right-hand columns here, a normal spring organic yield, a normal spring conventional yields, the yields are quite competitive. The yields of organic are 96% of a conventional yielding plot. Very, very competitive yields. Where we do see those yield drags are in wet springs where we just can't get out and do timely weed management. Here's the Arlington site on a wet spring, conventional yields 160 bushels per acre, organic yields 115 bushels per acre. So that's really the yield drag we've seen, and we've heard other speakers touch upon just the importance of weed management and the importance of picking fields and ideally picking soils that will allow for the timely weed management as well as watching the weather. If we can get out there and weed, very, very good yields off of organic systems. Similarly with soybeans, same sort of trends. We see organic yields here on the right-hand side. ARS is the Arlington site. Lakeland, the LAC site, is a different site. It's a heavier soil located near East Troy. But again, we see if we can get out there in a normal spring, yields are very competitive. 54 bushel an acre off of an organic soybean field, 57 bushel an acre off of a conventional soybean field. 95% yield as compared to conventional. Those wet springs, though, that's where we see the issues. Not being able to get out there and weed, that's when we see those yield drags. So again, this is data tracking over 25 years of organically managed sites at our Arlington research station. Again, looking at these gross margins, another thing that's been a lot of questions about, both on class and online. How does organic perform? This is data that is from up to 2009, so we need to continue to do these analyses. But what we do see is that organic, because of the price that is offered for organic at market, continually outperforms the conventional corn soybean rotation. Those trends, even though we don't have the data from the last 6 years or so, those trends are consistent and are still maintaining. So just to reiterate, off of the data that we've taken, where we account for all our costs on the fields that we manage as a farmer would, with seed costs, input costs, diesel costs, pesticide costs, organic continues to and consistently offers a greater return per acre as compared to a conventional system. And this was something that was touched upon too, so I threw this slide on. There was some discussion about the cost of organic seed, and here with the yellow line we see the cost of organic seed over the past 10 years from 2000 to 2011 compared to the cost of conventional. Organic seed, when you compare it to traded seed, is actually very competitive. Organic is more expensive than a comparable variety that is produced non-organically. But as compared to some of the traded seeds we grow in conventional systems, the price is actually quite comparable. Soybeans, same sort of phenomenon. When we talk about organic seeds grown organically, produced organically, when compared to the traded soybean varieties, actually quite comparable and competitive in costs. And then total expenses. There was questions about this too. Again, this is tracking from data collected off of our Arlington research station, looking at conventionally versus organically managed sites. When we look at total expenses, organic is quite comparable to a conventional system, trending on very, very similar lines. So with that, just again, wanted to touch upon that from data that we've collected here at UW, those issues with costs and profitability. But what I really want to get into is the cover crop based reduced tillage system. Oftentimes we hear this as called organic no-till, but we've kind of gone away from calling it organic no-till because what we're really doing with this technique is focusing on limiting tillage in certain phases. We're certainly not eliminating it yet across the organic system, but we are substantially limiting tillage and cultivation at certain phases of the rotation. Here in Wisconsin, particularly southern Wisconsin, where I've done the vast majority of my research, the soybean phase is most reliable. And even if we look across the country, where most farmers and researchers have gotten it to work, it's with the soybean rye system. Is the corn phase possible? With the cover crop varieties that we have available, it's very difficult. The Rodale Institute, Jeff Moyer, that's really pioneered a lot of this work, they've had success with corn. The research facility with USDA that is pretty close by to the Rodale Institute, they've had success. But we're just right on a line where it's just hard to synchronize the cover crop maturity and the termination of the cover crop with planting corn in early enough that we get a decent yield. Essentially in this technique, what we're trying to do is use a fall planted cover crop to smother weeds. So we are essentially investing in all our weed management in the fall. Typically here in Wisconsin, we're planting those cover crops in September, really looking at following either a cereal grain phase or potentially also potentially the termination or the after an early silage crop. If you get an early maturing corn silage, you could potentially get in with the rye early enough after that phase of the rotation as well. We let those cover crops, continue to survive over the winter. They start growing again in April. And then those cover crops are terminated in the spring. So we're terminating at a very specific phase when those heads of the cover crops, the cereal grains, start to flower. And then they're either rolled, crimped, or mowed. The cash crops are then planted directly into that rolled cover crop following termination. And then at that point, we really do no or very limited cultivation for weed management. So the tillage in this phase of the rotation is really focused on preparation of the seed bed for the cover crop, which is typically cereal rye. This is a picture of the Roller-Crimper that again was really pioneered by the Rodale Institute with this particular design of the Roller-Crimper. Been very lucky to be able to work with Jeff Moyer on this since I started with this technique in 2008. This instrument costs about $5,000. It's ground driven. Many people purchase them from a manufacturer located in Pennsylvania, I&J Manufacturing. They have a website, croproller.com, but there's also the specific plans for this Roller-Crimper on the Rodale Institute website, so you can easily find that from the Rodale Institute site. It can be front or rear mounted. There's benefits to each. We've been front mounting it, and that's typically what's recommended by Jeff. There's different cover crops that can be used in the system. For a legume, for soybean, we're typically using a cereal grain. From the research I've done and the research that other people have done, winter rye has always come out as superior as a cereal grain. People have used winter wheat, winter barley, but winter rye really consistently puts on the biomass that we need, has great winter hardiness, and also exhibits some degree of allelopathy. So as well as physically preventing weeds from germinating with that rye mulch, it also exudes a chemical that helps suppress weeds from germinating. In this system, we're planting generally at about 3 bushel an acre. Hairy vetch has been used. This is with the corn system that's been developed in Pennsylvania and Maryland, where they're typically using a hairy vetch. Unfortunately, hairy vetch has relatively late maturity, and it is very, very important to synchronize the maturity of the cover crop with termination. In hairy vetch's case, and with any legume, we're really trying to synchronize termination with early pod set. And with the hairy vetch varieties that are available, that doesn't occur in Wisconsin until about June 20th. If you try to get in too early, the vetch will just come back, continue to grow, and be a weed problem. When it has worked, it's typically planted at 25 pounds per acre. But again, at this point, I think there's still just too many risks in the system to recommend this on a large scale in Wisconsin. I'm still hopeful with some breeding efforts that this is possible, but right now it's risky. Ideally, mixtures would be a great solution to this system, or a great addition to this system. It helps minimize lodging of the cereal grain, which we definitely see. But the issue is synchronizing maturity in the mixture to again allow for adequate termination. I don't think it's an insurmountable barrier, but right now I think one has to be cautious. Really, like I mentioned, we're investing our weed management in this system in the fall, and we really need to do whatever we can agronomically to make sure that we're returning that investment. So in terms of this system, what we really need to do is do everything we can to ensure adequate cover crop biomass. And there's been quite a bit of research that has demonstrated that we're looking for 8,000 pounds per acre minimum for that rye biomass. Really, even 9,000 to 10,000 pounds per acre is more ideal. That's a lot of biomass, and unfortunately right now we don't have great tools to try to anticipate the biomass in early May. So it'd be nice to anticipate the biomass production, and then you can make a decision as a farmer whether or not it'd be good to incorporate that cover crop as a green manure or to let it continue to grow and then roll crimp. Hoping to develop some of those tools, but right now it's more of a feel type of thing, being able to go out there and visually assessing the stand to try to anticipate whether or not you're going to make this minimum biomass level. This is some photos from Stephen Mirsky out of USDA, and I think this does a really nice job illustrating the importance of getting that rye cover crop in on time. Stephen, with his research group, did 6 different planting dates of rye from August to October. These are all seeded at the same rate, and these photographs are actually taken in the spring. And what it really, I think, illustrates is the importance of getting that rye in early enough. I know rye is a typical green manure cover crop. Here in Wisconsin, we can potentially plant it in December, and it will germinate and grow depending on the fall-winter season. But when we're looking at optimizing biomass and putting all of our weed management cards into the cover crop, it's really important to get it in this September 15th timeframe. Planting it later, even October 15th, you can see the impact on potential biomass production of that cover crop. So getting it in early, figuring out a rotation where you can get it in early, and prioritizing getting it in, because this is your weed management for the subsequent season. This is just another illustration of, again, that importance of getting enough biomass and doing everything you can agronomically to ensure that. Here on the x-axis, we have cereal rye mulch that is up to 9,000, 12,000 pounds per acre. And then we have the amount of weeds here on the y-axis. And what we see is that to get to what we have as our weed management threshold, we really need to get in that excess of 9,000 pounds. I mean, you can get close to there. It's where we have that 8,000 pound absolute minimum, but what we're really trying to aim at is even like 10,000 pounds to be able to reach that weed management threshold. This is some research, again, out of that USDA lab in Beltsville, Maryland. So how reliably does the system work? This is also something that you need to consider before attempting and adopting this system. It's not something that's going to work in every field. This is something that we've been hearing more broadly in organic systems. The same thing doesn't always work in every system in every field. It depends on what your weed species are. It definitely works better with broadleaf weeds versus grasses or perennial weeds. It's not a technique that's going to clean up a weedy field. You need to go into a field that already has minimal to moderate weed pressure. It's going to make your life easier, but it's not going to clean up a field. It's also going to be better with respect to optimizing soil quality, soil health, and integrating cover crops into your system. It doesn't work really well with perennial weeds. And if anything, if we continue to use this system so far, if we've tried more of a continuous no-till system in organic, we see a buildup of perennial weed pressure because of the fact it tends not to be able to suppress perennial weeds. Perennial weeds have a lot of energy stored in those underground plant reproductive parts, and they tend to have enough energy to be able to grow up through that mulch. We're trying to minimize sunlight from reaching the soil surface and really having those seedlings expend their energy before getting up through the mulch. So perennial weeds don't tend to be suppressed real well in this system, unfortunately. Again, we need to have systems, rotations, where we can ensure those high cover crop residue levels, and we also need a competitive cash crop. Soybean as a plant is just absolutely incredible. It's amazing how resilient soybean is. That seed will germinate without even being put in the ground as long as it's under the mulch. You can have greater variability in stand. We've had decent yields as low as 50,000 plants per acre. Wouldn't recommend it, but I mean, it just is amazing how it can compensate for yields if there is something that reduces the stand. Soybean is just made for this system, and corn and some other crops where they may not be as competitive getting through the mulch, they're just not going to work. I get emails from farmers all over the world that have really interesting combinations that they want to try, and it's not going to work with everything. I've mentioned this a couple times. Crimping has to be done with cereal grains, not just rye, but any cereal grain at enthesis. And enthesis is the phase of flowering. What we're looking for, and I'm not sure how well you guys can see it, but we're looking for the anthers to be coming off of these heads. When you roll or put your hand across the top of that crop, you can see the yellow pollen come off the crop. When the crimper goes through the field, it's just a massive yellow pollen coming off of there. But that's the phase that we're looking for with cereal rye. Here in Wisconsin, I've had it happen as early as Memorial Day, but typically we're looking at about June 3rd. So a little bit late for planting of soybean, but not too late for an organic system. But you absolutely need to wait till this stage. Like I mentioned, if you're going to try a legume, you need to wait for it to reach early pod set, but that's pretty late here in Wisconsin. Here's a photograph of our crimper. At this point, we had it rear mounted. We've front mounted it since then, but this is how tall that rye is at maturity, and we're essentially creating that thick mat on the soil surface, and we're going to come right behind there and plant soybean directly into that rye mulch. Here's just another view of that thick rye mulch. You can see that there's very few gaps, but any place where there is a gap, like right here, there's going to be weeds coming through there. So we're trying to get that thick enough where we're not seeing any brown soil. It's just a thick mat of rye mulch. Equipment, and we've heard this over and over again. Another theme that we've been hearing from many different speakers, and this is something that I think anyone that's been doing organic can attest. And this is something that's maybe a change in mindset, but you need to take the time to really optimize your equipment. Like I think Daryl was saying yesterday, sometimes it takes 3 hours to optimize, where you're setting that cultivator. Similar in organic no-till. I mean, a lot of your investment in the crop is coming with your machinery. And similarly, you want to make sure that your planting equipment is such that you're setting it so that that seed is getting through the mulch, getting into the soil, and you get good seed to soil contact. So we've been working to do various things to optimize our planters. Other groups across the country have been working on this, changing out coulters, other sort of disc openers. We've had luck with both typical corn planter as well as a no-till drill. Jeff Moyer recommends a planter because he feels like you get greater precision in seed placement, and it also offers the opportunity, as you're putting it on 30-inch rows, if you do get breakthrough weeds, to come in with a high residue cultivator even into July and clean up some of those weeds. And certainly I do know of farmers that use this technique here in Wisconsin that have done that and done that successfully. So even though no-till drills, you'll get closer rows, you'll get quicker canopy cover, we're still going with 30-inch rows using a corn planter and just working to get that equipment optimized to allow for really slicing through that mulch and getting good seed to soil contact. Typically, we're bumping up the seeding rate of soybean a bit. We're going at about now 225,000 seeds per acre. Again, in organic, we tend to go a bit higher anyway to compensate for cultivator blight, but we're bumping that up even a little bit higher using this technique. Adding extra weights to the planter can be beneficial. That is a lot of mulch that we're planting into. So even changing out some of the aspects of the planter to account for that, putting some extra weight doesn't hurt either. Just to make sure that that seed gets through the mulch into the ground. Like I said, soybean is incredibly, incredibly resilient. So even if you get it under the mulch, if it can hold moisture under there, the soybean actually can set a root and grow. This is another one, again, following up on some of Daryl's themes of watching the weather. If you can plant, and granted for all circumstances this is probably ideal, but particularly for this, if you're planting into a bit of soil moisture and you can time it so that you're planting right before a rain, even if you get some of that seed that falls through the mulch but not into the ground, you'll get a decent stand. That seed will come up and come through, but to make this work in a no-till system, you have to worry about soil moisture a bit and following with rains. There was one year when I was first starting this that I did try to plant into a dry field, and that no-till drill was just bouncing along the top of the crop, and that seed wasn't getting into the ground, so we had to wait a few days before we attempted to plant again, and then it worked. There's also some evidence that if you crimp early and then wait a week or two, that it's easier to slice through that mulch because that mulch dries down a bit. It becomes a bit more brittle, but I haven't fooled around with that myself. I'm typically always planting into that mulch right after either having that planter on the same tractor as the crimper or coming in right behind it. These are some soybean yields across different experiments. I will say that most of these yields are taken from yields of cover crop based no-till soybeans as a discrete phase. Like I mentioned, in our continuous no-till system where we were doing both rye soybean and corn veg, we were getting buildup of weeds in the system and we were seeing yields decline. But looking at it more as a discrete phase, so here there's both my data and data from a grad student of Dr. Josh Posner, who is also working with this technique, Emily Bernstein. But you can see the yields are quite competitive. The first year that I did this, our tilled soybeans were 47 bushel an acre as organic, cultivated soybeans, no-till at 30 bushel an acre. I think this is reflective of the learning curve here. Just, again, making sure you get that equipment set right, making sure you get good rye biomass. But the longer that we've done this, the more experience we have, we see this yield gap close. So we do see that, in 2011, 52 bushel an acre off of organic, typically grown soybean, 53 off of our cover crop based no-till. 2013 saw a bit more of a yield drag with the cover crop based no-till, but typically, we're doing pretty well. We always see a bit of a yield reduction with the no-till, but again, we do have definite benefits of the system with no cultivation. The other real benefit that I see in this system is in terms of the risk over all soybean phases. I just showed some slides to show the issues with timely cultivation. A huge benefit of this is that you don't have to worry about getting out there and cultivating timely. So you take out that variable of weather and being able to get out in the field and cultivate that soybean, because once it's planted, you typically don't have to get back out there till you're combining those beans in the fall. This last year, 2015, we got just phenomenal yields off of all plots, which was typical across the state, 60 bushel an acre of organic soybeans and 55 bushel an acre using the cover crop based no-till technique. Really, really good organic soybean yields in both systems. Corn silage, I think if we do corn in Wisconsin, this probably is going to be the fit, at least for now, until we can get legume cover crop germplasm that we can get to work that's going to mature earlier. This is corn silage, where we didn't plant the silage till pretty late in June, probably about mid-June. But it's not too bad. Definitely lower than we typically see, but we're getting 6-7 tons per acre mowing the residue and planting directly into it versus crimping it. If we can get legumes to work, Austrian winter pea would be a phenomenal legume in this system. It puts on tons of biomass. It matures in May. And if we can get this to reliably overwinter, we can get great yields using the no-till system. Unfortunately, I think this was like 1 out of 5 years I was able to get Austrian winter pea to overwinter. Typically we don't. This may be a winter that we do though, so I'll be curious to see. Love to see some Austrian winter pea cultivars that can overwinter in Wisconsin. These are just some photos. These are photos from last year, but this year we had very similar results. One of the issues potentially with that yield lag that we see is that, these photos of beans here are from June 7th, and you can see these beans aren't very big. Part of the yield lag might be due to the growth lag. This is due to colder soil temperatures. We do get some end tie-up with that high carbon residue, but typically those beans will catch up by October, but definitely see a bit later. You can see just though still the thickness of that mulch and the weed suppression. This is what the beans look like in mid-August. Again, you still see that there's some stunting. You can see here though that residue is still holding up quite well. There may be a couple weeds in there, but really nice clean fields, great weed suppression. This is just to show real quickly, again, just how winter rye is just phenomenally better with respect to weed suppression. We did get some breakthrough weeds in 2010, but the second year that I collected this data set anyway, we had absolutely no weeds in the winter rye versus looking at some other cereal grains such as winter triticale or winter barley where there was weed breakthrough. Again, functional allelopathy of that cereal rye. So just quickly to get to Mark, some keys for success. With this, I would suggest starting small. It's a different technique. It started on a smaller, just a portion of your fields. Choose wisely, again, avoid fields with perennial weed pressure. Don't skimp, get those cover crops in by mid-September. Plant them at the higher seeding rate. Don't go with the 1 bushel an acre you might do as a green manure cover crop. You're relying on that for your whole next season's weed management. Make sure that you pay attention to your equipment, set that equipment appropriately, bump up that seeding rate. Again, do the alterations to the equipment that allow for slicing through that thick residue. Plan ahead, figure out when in the rotation you're going to put this, order the seed so it's there for you to plant in mid-September. Really think about this as a priority as part of your fall activities. And be flexible. If that cover crop doesn't look like it made it through the winter yet, if you kind of took a chance and planted a little bit later, if it looks skimpy in late April, early May, till it under as a green manure and just go with typical organic practices. It's not worth it to try to crimp it, have a crappy rye cover crop that's been established as a mulch and get weed breakthrough in that soybean. And then stick with the program. There's places in the organic management world to be creative, but there's certain aspects of cover crop based no-till that you just have to adhere to the program. Planting that in September, planting at the high enough seeding rate, that's what's going to make you successful using this technique. So with that, I will pass it on to Mark, and I think we're going to take Mark and then take questions.
Correct. Thank you so much, Erin. All right. There you go. Mark Doudlah.
Thank you. Great job, Erin. You really gave us the confidence to start doing crimped cereal rye in a very big way. We started out in 2013, kind of fell into this, planted 620 acres of cereal rye, 110 pounds the acre, hadn't really thought too much about it. Had an aha moment going to the MOSA conference in 2014, early spring, with Jeff Moyer talking about crimped cereal rye, and really decided that we could do this, and we were set up fairly well. Since then, in 2015, Erin came to our field day, and I think the biggest part of the interest of the entire organic field day was on crimped cereal rye. I mean, she brought people in from all these different states. I think there was more than 9 states. We had almost 175 or more farmers there. And yeah, something that started out as the epicenter maybe in Rodale, Erin's just done a fabulous job ground truthing and giving me the confidence to invest in this new technology. Like Erin said, get it right in the fall. If your field doesn't look like this in the spring, maybe you should get a different tillage tool. So again, she talked about seeding rates. We started out at 110 pounds, but actually I think planting date is more important than pounds to a certain point, but certainly I completely agree 3 to 4 bushel at this point. We do things a little backwards, as you saw here. We actually have a Salford coulter seeder that runs through the field, just a no-till coulter. Then there's a shotgun behind it that shoots the seed in that no-till slot. And like Erin said, you can be pretty sloppy getting the seed to the ground as long as it's under that mat. But it really is nice rolling down 7.5 ton of actively green carbon as we're planting. I mean, you can imagine what that does to the biology of your soil. We feel that the rye roots, are decomposing and feeding those beans, and then of course we're really weatherproofing our soil too, because we don't have any runoff at all, which is one of the most erosive crops we grow, soybeans. So it really changed it. That's what it looks like when we're done planting. Our crimper is a right-way crimper, 40-footer, that matches our tram lines in our system, and they're not all created equal. This one's 550 pounds per foot. I think the Rodale model is 220, depending on if you add weight or not. We had to re-crimp an opposite direction to kill our cereal rye to get what we thought was adequate control. And when you're doing this on 620 acres, that's kind of a scary feeling when all your fields look like this and 3 days later the rye's coming back up. But don't panic. We plant in 15-inch rows. We're a believer in narrow rows because we do 15-inch corn, soybeans, even wheat. It'll fill in. Before you know it, here's July, mid-July, and you can see a little bit of the cereal rye stragglers, but look at that, largely clean, no weeds, even where we don't have competition of a soybean crop there. Just amazing what it can do. September 16th, and here we do a foliar application, so we're doing some liquid fish, some SP1, bugs in a jug, K-sulfate, and whatever our micros come in at based on tissue sampling. We've even done dry edible black beans using this system. So it can work with more than soybeans. Jason's in the class today, my son, and he was largely the crew leader of the, I guess you'd say some of it's Stoughton soccer team, but anyways came out, and we will walk for giant ragweed. We have also had problems with burdock that we shoveled out in the spring and some things like that. But just to touch things up, we're really not afraid to spend $30 to $60 an acre to make sure we can get it clean. As Daryl said yesterday, giant ragweed can literally destroy organic farms in half a decade. So the previous slide, it's like combining and carpet, that cereal rye. It is a little dustier in the combine, we have some more of that coming through, but we had great luck, 47 bushel the acre right out of the gate. So I don't know if you guys have seen the movie Show Me the Money, where Tom Cruise is playing Jerry Maguire, and you got Mr. Tidwell, Rod Tidwell on the bottom, and they're both pretty arrogant, and Rod's saying, show me the money, and Jerry's his big time agent trying to hang on to him and get Rod to step up to the plate and really do all the things you need to do in organic. And then he's going to pay him the money. So hopefully I'm going to show you the money in some of these slides. So I'm going to start out with our soybeans. And because we had transitioned quickly from Roundup to this non-chemical approach, I just wanted to include some of the things. On the left column, you can see here that we have transitional and we have organic. And here's our costs for our seed, our fertilizer, sulfur, I think combining, hauling, certification. I think the one thing I missed in this example was actually Jason and his crew, about $35 an acre going out and getting this done. But you can see the return to labor and management, so that it doesn't require land rent or anything like that. But in the transitional system, about $365. In the organic system, about $1,050 an acre, return to labor and management. So there's good money if you can, achieve all the objectives that Erin talked about for weed control and making the system work. Do have a comparison though on crimped cereal rye and chemical costs. So we had a couple fields that we got scared away by. So our average no-till crimped cereal rye ended up 45 bushel. The chemical program ended up at 49 bushels. So there's about another 4 bushel the acre. Well, if you figure it out at $13 an acre, the crimped cereal rye lost about $55 due to yield, but by the time you paid $82 for Gangster Roundup and Cobra, it ended up netting an additional near $27 the acre. So it's not always yield is king either. It depends what we're putting into it. Our 3-year average on our farm for Roundup Ready soybeans was 55 bushel, at a price of $10 is $550 gross. Our food grade beans yielded 45 bushel, but there was a $2.75 premium, so we ended up grossing $576. So our crimped rye food grade advantage over our GMO, a 3-year study, was about another $26, $27. But certainly, we started out with the confidence of Rodale and Erin really ground truthing this. Reginald Destry, my organic consultant, was a huge help. And even my son, had I not had the workforce to go through there and get the giant ragweed, would have made it more difficult. Winter wheat we also grow, as organic. Here's tine weeding. We talked about the other day, tine weeding of cereals. But we love wheat in the rotation to grow our nitrogen ahead of corn. Again, show me the money on organic wheat. In 2012, we ran 92 bushel the acre. We got $13.50 a bushel for it. So by the time you $1,200 of revenue, take out the expenses, return to labor and management, just under $1,000. Now, in 2013, we did an organic CRP field that we moldboard plowed. And that way had a little more difficult with the yield situation because we didn't have quite enough N. We still ran $43, 43 bushel per acre, but we sold it that year for $18.50 a bushel, and they paid the trucking to go to Lindley Mills in North Carolina. So again, almost $700. Again, starting on corn, we like to start with medium red clover. Here we're filling the plain. This is how our corn crop starts. We're planting medium red clover into winter wheat as the snow is leaving the fields. So we frost seed that, combine off the wheat. You got that beautiful crop of medium red clover underneath. Let that grow all year into the following spring, and then plow it under. Sometimes we use other crops. This was 2015. We actually didn't have as nice a stand as vetch because we decided to aerial seed a lot of our crops in 14 because the season was so long and getting late, and that cost us a lot of money. So we're actually going whenever we can with a ground engaging drill or some sort of mechanical way of getting the seed in the ground. After we moldboard these fields, we'll do some light surface tillage, and we like to put on 500 pounds of high-cal lime. We like to mix that with 500 pounds of gyp. And then if we have it, we'll put compost on. We'll even put chicken pellets on. That high-cal lime over the top of your field will actually help you with the foxtail and weed control by preventing those things from germing. So that's one thing that we do. Here we're planting corn in these fields, and I guess start with the bottom. I don't want to risk a high-value crop by planting naked. Think about what everybody put on $7 conventional corn. Now we're talking about $10 to $14 organic corn. Don't plant naked. So we put treatment on our seed. We put Chilean nitrate 2x2 because we have to beat the weeds. Maybe we don't always need it, but I want to make sure our crop always beats the weeds. That's critical. In the row we'll put fish, bugs in a jug SP1, molasses to rev up the biological in that seed trench, and we'll also put some things in like garlic and Mycotrol O in the seed trench to keep the worms away and some of the other problems that you can have. Keep it clean. I don't care if it's a rotary hoe, tine weeder. Again, this is a great example of 15-inch corn with tram lines. Our tram lines at 120 inches are two 30-inch rows, so we can access the field. Bury any weeds. When your corn gets just barely to the point that you can go through it. We'll take care of that. Last pass we make is a foliar application. So we'll take tissue samples, we'll figure out what our micronutrient needs are, and we'll give it a shot before we can't get through the field anymore. 40 days after planting, it'll be over your head. Our in 2014, our corn in 15-inch rows yielded 201 bushel an acre of organic corn. You can see 15-inch rows and the sunlight interception and the stalks and just the lack of weeds. Yeah, there's a few weeds down there, but they're really struggling to survive. So just some beautiful ear height. And of course, we do go through and weed, but what we find is most of the weeds are in our tram lines. So we'll have velvet leaf that can make it up through that 30-inch row, whereas in between in the 15s, we've seen the velvet leaf actually disappear in a dry period or something because it just can't compete with that robust corn. But we do go through and walk. We'll look for giant ragweed and maybe velvets if we have to, but not very often. We also implemented track tram lines, so everything we have is on 39.5 feet, and then we have those two tram lines at 120 inches. And we'll always go back to those. We like to think of those as permanent railroads, through our fields. improve soil health. Here's harvesting of organic corn, you know, and nice clean field that you see there. And matter of fact, I think I missed it, but in the corner of this, Jason's actually out there and with Matt, who I'm actually seeding our cereal rye as we're combining corn. So unfortunately, it's all got to happen the same day. So here's an example of, we tried 10 acres of crimping vetch. We had a vetch rye stand, and you can see the perimeter of this field was tilled. The inside was the crimped portion, and you can see that we just aren't getting the nitrogen, don't have the biological release yet to make this work. So, but we're not going to give up on it. We're playing with different cover crops and what we can do. Again, transitional corn versus organic corn, you know, from medium red clover to tillage all the way down to the bottom line, 201 bushel the acre. I think we sold our corn for nearly $14.50. We came close to grossing $3,000 an acre. So your return to labor and management can be over $2,000 an acre if you do it right. On the transitional side, you can see though, even at those yields and selling at a much lower price at $190, we're not going to transition much of our production using corn because, you know, without the price, it just doesn't work with the higher inputs. We do a double crop. We use canning peas, and I think Randy Hughes did a great job of explaining the weed cycle and how we break that up. And then from canning peas, we'll go to black beans. And here's just an example of rotary hoeing. The beans aren't up. 4 days later, here's the beans that are up, and we're out there hoeing again. Love the rotary hoe. Unfortunately, we have too many acres to cover with even a 40-footer, so we're driving, you know, 10, 12, 14 miles an hour just to make sure we're timely across everything. But although I think Daryl has some very good points about speed and what you can do. Here we are with black beans, Oro black beans with a tine weeder. You can see these series of tines. We had a nice little crust. You want to break your crust because remember, if we get a crust over the soil, we're getting more CO2 present underneath, and that's what we use to germinate a lot of things, is CO2. So one of the reasons to run farm crust free is to minimize the amount of weeds that keep coming up through the seed bank. And I don't know about you guys, but I can't even hoe that well with a hand hoe. If you look at that crust and how it's broken up, it's just beautiful. So, but again, it's about timing. If we had 3 weeks of rain, I'm not sure, you know, we probably have the rest of Stoughton hired to come out and weed our fields. But hands-free RTK cultivation of black beans. Like I said the other day, it only works on level fields. I don't have to play the piano in this field because it's just one end to the other. On our rolling hills and stuff, we have to hit nudge and we have to keep adjusting, so really you need some implement guidance. But again, here's 15-inch cultivation with tram lines at 120. What some dry edibles beans look like as they're filling in nicely. There you can see we're really starting to mature, and here we are combining. You know, and I think we walked this field for $30 an acre and got the velvets out, and you can see it's pretty clean. Again, cleaning is important too. We got an air compressor behind our fuel tank, and you know, Matt does a fabulous job with us here, making sure everything's clean. Again, we got peas on the beginning part, then we add black beans. If you look at our double cropping numbers on the bottom, on a transitional program, we can make about $700 the acre. In organic, we can make over $1,000. We've gotten better with the yields of both of these crops, and you know, I'd like to mention one thing too with the black beans. They were grown for Chipotle restaurant, and Chipotle restaurant stepped up to the plate and added a quarter per pound for dry beans. So that's really advantageous in your transitional years to find you a crop that makes some additional money.
So Mark, we have a couple more minutes for short course students. We'll make sure if you guys have any questions, get them asked.
What are you talking about when you say bugs in a jug? Like what kind of fertilizer is that?
Yeah, bugs in a jug. What we're looking at is a lot of bacterial things and even some fungi. There's spent yeast and other things that are put in those, and it's just to ensure that the right type of bug is there, and that if everything else is there, the right micronutrients and the nutrition to feed them, they'll grow rapidly. So.
Anything else here?
You said that you have 30-inch tram lines. For your planting unit, do you have to take out one unit?
Yeah, on our corn planter, we
Yeah.
lift those front pusher units at
Okay.
120 spacing. Yep, correct.
Great. So,
If you're growing wheat for straw and wheat,
We don't bale the straw.
okay, but if
Typically.
you were, how would that work for, say, wheat control, if you're trying to get another crop in?
Well, we would go heavier with our cover crop and get that going, and then typically that cover crop cocktail the following spring, we would plow down and plant corn. So I don't think it'd be a big negative as long as you replace it with cover crops.
okay, so we're take off. I'll begin here with the latest. You think you guys want it? Around 8, we're going to go back.
Do I sign up for my thing then, or should I?
Tell me that. That works as well.
All right.
Go to the 3 days.
We have 2 rotations that we're working with, one for tillable lands and one for highly erodible. As you can see here, it's just a combination of soy, corn, canning peas, dry edibles, wheat, and then dry edibles, and then in the 6th year corn. The crimping side, we're still working out the crimping of the corn to see if we can make that work. But right now, that's a cereal rye and soybean program with a rye and vetch, harvesting that for seed, cover crop seed, and then going to crimping of our cover crops to the corn year. But we're still trying to work that out. We have extensive spreadsheet to transition from conventional to organic farming. As you can see, we go to dark green. This is transitioning every field, and when we go all the way to dark green, then we're certified organic after 36 months. Some of the other crops in the transitional years that we use are 40-10 speckled forage peas. We seeded these at 2 bushel this year and worked very well. That's a crop that you can even crimp, although it doesn't have enough of the biomass and ligopathic effect to really hold the weeds back. We did try it on some dry beans with very limited success, but we wanted to see what we could do with this plant. Could it be useful to us? But typically we harvested about 220 acres this last year of dry beans dry peas, speckled peas going about 38 bushel the acre. We were able to sell those for $18 to $26, whether they were cleaned or uncleaned. So in these transitional years, we're typically not producing commodity crops. We're producing some other things that we can make some cash flow with and some profit. Here was no-tilling into that crimping that you saw there. This is a 173-acre field of pinto beans. And then here is Aristic Rye and Purple Bounty Vetch that we're combining for seed. So we're going to get a blend of, as you can see in the grain tank there, of rye and vetch. And both of those varieties are a little earlier maturing, so we're hoping we can get those to work in our system. The other critical thing is you really got to gear up for timely cover crops. So we're actually now, due to the volume, using our grain cart for cover crop seed to fill our drill and things, because you're talking a large volume, and if you have a significant amount of acres, you really need to get after it because it's timely is very, very important. We did a bio strip till crimp cover crop experiment. Talked to Erin about this. In our 15-inch rows where we're going to plant corn, we wanted something that would winter kill. So we planted oats, radish, sorghum in those 15-inch rows. And then in between, in the twin fives, we actually have lynx peas, which is a pea that should overwinter. And then when the corn got about 3 leaf stage, we would go in and crimp those peas and try to kill them, and then provide a bunch of the nitrogen source. And we loaded this up in the 2 hoppers. And we had pretty good success with the 15-inch corn stuff, but the lynx peas really never showed up in between. So because this was a vetch field, slowly we're starting to be overtaken by vetch. So I'm not sure if I'll be able to plant through this in the spring, but we're not going to give up on trying to make organic corn, crimping work. So how are we doing for time?
I mean, since the short course students are gone, you can go for a while longer.
Okay.
Questions after that.
Well, a lot of people have been educating our consumers, the people who buy our products. And really, soil health is human health. And, I think in the race to feed the world, we have really forgotten what's important from soil health and the direct link to your health. We've had many of people who aren't paid by agriculture doing a fabulous job promoting this industry, whether it's Dr. Oz talking to housewives during the day about organic, or if it's Dr. Mercola on the internet, or Dr. Hyman and even Dr. Huber. So I think there's a lot of people out there getting the message, creating the demand. You have some huge companies that have stepped up to the plate, not only Chipotle, which you maybe heard some of the negative press about Chipotle, but you have Walmart, you have Costco, and it's certainly, the demand is there. So people, the consumers knocking at your door. So I think I'd like to just say that that's really, really important, because we have people wanting the product, the organic product that you're producing. Just wanted to spend a second about Moses certification. This is what it means to us. That's a pretty large table, and it's an all-day affair to get through that, but it's what you need to do. So when we talked about transitioning and going to organic, again, show me the money, we're probably going to look at, the double crop scenario of peas and black beans. We like that. We like the food grade soybeans. We can get there on that. We're not going to grow much corn transitioning to organic, and if we can prevent it. And I think the wheat thing can work out also. I think that can be a potential, in addition to other crops. If you can get 500 pounds of acre of vetch and sell it for $1.10 to, depending on the variety, up to almost $3 a pound, we can make that work too. So, and like I said, Manitoba 4010 peas too look like they're going to be a great crop as well, again. But then you have to be geared up for the cover crop. You have to be able to clean all that. You have to bag it, sell it, So, I mean, it takes a little bit. So I guess I'll leave you with, for those of you who hadn't thought about organic, when's your aha moment going to occur? So we see the consumer demand. We see, the soils and what we need to be doing, and it's about your health. So I think the challenge really is your family's health. Can we regenerate soils and soil biology, and ultimately the profitability and the bottom line to your farm? So here's a picture of my dad, clearly outstanding in this field. 2008, we started to do organic because he was diagnosed with mantle cell lymphoma. So now in 2017, we'll have over 1,400 acres certified, so we're well on our way. Unfortunately, the lymphoma doctor who's just 3 blocks this way at UW Hospital said it was exposure to herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, and degreasers. Unfortunately, Dad was 73 years young when we lost him, but he was certainly my mentor, my rock, and really made us think outside the box. So I think FDR said it pretty well: a nation that destroys its soil destroys itself. So again, thank you for listening to my story about why I'm organic.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you, Mark. So I think at this point we're going to open it up for questions both in class and online. So both Erin and Mark will be at the podium to answer questions. And first, there's someone online is saying they are clapping.
Oh.
Thank you for that. So maybe first we'll take a couple from in class if folks here have questions. Go ahead, Dale.
Could you go over the advantages and the disadvantages of front mounting the roller rather than rear mounting it?
Question was advantages and disadvantages of front mounting or rear mounting the Roller-Crimper.
Sure. I haven't seen a lot of data to show a clear advantage of front mounting. For us that we're not on RTK technology, we're doing larger fields. Honestly, the biggest advantage to us for front mounting is we can tell where we've planted because we're just dragging it along behind. Jeff Moyer has stated that in the way that he's designed the implement, by having it front mounted, it's the first thing to touch the rye. So there's more down pressure, there's greater crimping. Or the Roller-Crimper, there's two different actions. There's a rolling down of rye as well as the crimping. And if it's behind and those tire tracks are touching the rye first, you don't get as much of that action of the rolling and the crimping. But we've done it both ways. It definitely works. I think yours is rear mounted. So I think it just, it depends on your strategy and your system. You certainly could rear mount as well as front mount. But now, again, because of, it's also one pass over the field, less diesel fuel, less, just tractor traffic over the field. I don't know if you have any thoughts.
I just have one thought about what we did this last year on Erin's suggestion. We unhooked the crimper from the planter, and we actually planted 2 to 3 weeks earlier, and then when the rye was ready, we crimped it. That also meant we crimped the soybeans that were about this tall. You see a little crankshaft in some of the soybeans, but on others you can't even see that you were there. So it really depends how aggressive your cereal rye crop. If there's no sunlight coming, the first set of cotyledons might be that far off the ground, So, but if you have it not quite as dense, they'll be right there where they are, and you can crimp them. And you don't even know that you went over the field. So that's one thing we did to try to put our harvest timing back in the norm. We were always getting on the last half of October combining beans, which isn't always a great place to be with the weather.
Yeah, we're typically combining around Halloween, so we are at a late harvest with our beans, which some years works right, some years it's right before snow falls.
You followed it?
Yeah. Would decoupling the roller and the planter help out with the allelopathic effect on corn and make that system work a little better?
That's a good question. Does decoupling and earlier termination of the rye have any impact on potential allelopathy? There's a lot we don't understand about allelopathy, at least that's my impression and review of the literature with respect to, as those roots decompose, would you have greater concentrations of allelopathic chemicals, and if you could somehow encourage that before corn decomposition. I think with the corn, corn actually, it's not quite as optimized as soybean, just with respect to growth, but it still is a larger seeded cash crop that can do quite well through that mulch. I think the issue with the rye versus the legume, as we've heard about again as a theme overall in the class, it's all about the end and getting the end to the crop. And that even with the soybean, we do see that there is nutrient tie-up as the microbes are starting to work on that high carbon residue. So what we've been trying to do, and there's been some work done by Chris Reber-Horton at North Carolina State as well as Stephen Mirsky about doing some, if you are going to do rye with corn, to do a top dressing of pelletized poultry manure, or there's potentially other options of getting N in the system. The other issue we see here in Wisconsin with rye and corn, which I don't think other places have seen quite as much, is that there tends to be more potential insect issues. There's several corn pests that are attracted to decaying grass residue, like armyworm, which comes in from the south, and it just seems like here in Wisconsin, when I've tried to synchronize the planting with the rye, it just seems like right when, sometimes, like we experienced this year, right when those armyworm flights come up. There's models that I think if you're really trying to optimize the system, that may be a way for us to get around that, but right now there's still a lot we need to think about with respect to optimizing the system. Like Mark, I haven't given up, but there's a lot of challenges. Soybean, I feel like we really have worked out.
Erin, in your 25 years of yield data, Do you have a rough handle on the probability of a wet spring?
Yeah, that's a good question. Probability of a wet spring and when we're going to see those 79% yields versus 95. And I haven't looked at the Wix data in that way, but that's an interesting. And then particularly now, as I'm also preparing a presentation the next couple of weeks on impacts of global climate change and what we might anticipate. So.
And a quick corollary, I mean, I've had a hard time getting cover crops established in the fall by not getting rainfall.
Yeah.
So I don't know if your weather data has that or not, but
Yeah.
that might be helpful to some folks who are.
Yeah. And that's where again, for the rye no-till system, I see a huge benefit. I mean, it is so nice to be able to plant that crop and not have to worry about getting out there and doing cultivation. But yeah, and I do fear, honestly, as we do see these shifts in weather patterns with respect to our reliance on cover crops and our reliance on timely cultivations, that organic is going to be challenged. And hopefully we can be creative enough that we can overcome those challenges. But organic as an industry is, I think, potentially even more susceptible to some of the shifts in weather patterns that we're seeing and anticipated to continue to see.
There's a question, I think, from Mark about why you like tractors as opposed to. If you step closer to the podium, folks.
Yeah, track vehicles. I guess we're after literally traveling on less square footage of the field. So we decided to do the 40-foot wide equipment with those permanent tram lines. You could also do 30-foot with those tram lines. But with tires, typically you exceed the weight capacity of the tire, either for traction or 3-point capacity or whatnot, of picking up a large rotary hoe or something like that. So a track vehicle, you don't have to run the duals or even the triples. So you're not trafficking very much. And where we do traffic, we're kind of giving up on that area. That's going to be our permanent tram line. So we're going to run through there, and if things aren't quite perfect, we're still going to make that pass to get weed control and some of the other things. Long term, I think there's some issues with no tillage because those tracks will get a little deeper with time. But if we rotate through and plow and stuff, we're going to come right back to those tracks again. So really, it's not that we're pro-track, but it's the only way that we can get that square footage in a linear fashion without driving on more of the field. So we're trying to optimize our field.
Yeah, that makes sense. Next question is, why crimp ahead of planting? We no-till drilled beans at 7.5 inches, then crimped and had 55 bushels to the acre.
Oh, that's great. I think, well, there's two potential thoughts there. And again, I touched on this a little bit. And I haven't done research and tried this myself, so I'm saying this with that grain of salt. I mean, I have heard, though, that there are some experiences, again, with, with the rye is still green when you're crimping it, and it is at times, depending on, ideally you're crimping in the same direction as you're planting. So there's not necessarily a lot of rye residue you need to slice through. Ideally, the planter's kind of pushing the stalks aside just slightly, and there's not that much resistance. But we do get, because we're planting at a relatively high seeding rate, as even compared to if you're growing that for grain, we do get lodging. So there are places where you need to cut through that rye. And the thought is, if you're drying it down a little bit, then it's easier to cut through. The other potential thought is, depending on where you are in the country, and I've been working more with farmers actually in Argentina and even in some of the drier areas of the U.S., that rye does pull up moisture, and even for about 2 weeks after it's been crimped, it's still green, it's still transpiring, you still get some moisture pulled up. Honestly, with our Wisconsin springs, that's actually been a benefit. If anything, we're on the wetter side, but depending on where you are in the country, you need to think about that too. And if you can crimp early and get some groundwater, that's soil moisture recharge, that could be beneficial. The other aspect here in Wisconsin in the northern part of the state, and I know Minnesota has done a bit more work on this. Paul Porter out of the agronomy department out of University of Minnesota. Josh Posner's program here did some work on this with Dave Stoltenberg from our agronomy department. And essentially what we're trying to do, well, this is a little bit opposite what Mark was saying, is we're planting earlier. So we're planting into a standing rye crop, getting 2 weeks or 3 weeks jump on a planting date, and then crimping and terminating later. And those beans, again, are quite resilient. I don't know if you could do this with corn with the growing point, depending on when that's coming out of the ground. But yeah, with crimping earlier, it's more due to either being able to slice through that residue by the residue drying down, or potentially recharging some soil moisture, depending on where you are in the country or even how the growing season's shaping up.
That actually brings up a question that was asked earlier, Erin, and that was yield drag in drier years. So how moisture in a year is going to affect that in this system, and maybe depending on soil type as well, particularly thinking about 2012 when you had the crop failure.
Yeah, and so 2012, and that was, the 2012 crop failure was essentially immediate. So what had happened was, we plant around June 1st, but that particular year, the rain shut off like right around Memorial Day. So we were, and again, with that rye sucking up moisture. So we were planting into a dry field, and essentially that crop never emerged. And that's a good, interesting question to try to analyze more precipitation patterns and how that may have affected overall yields. Once that rye dies, it actually can be beneficial with respect to conserving soil moisture, and we have done soil moisture measurements throughout the season, and we do see a dip in soil moisture again as that rye is at full growth, continuing to transpire, but that rye mat actually holds in soil moisture. So it actually anticipate, if you can get that soybean to come up, that there would be potential benefits in a dry year. Mm-hmm. We haven't had a lot of that variation, but that 2012 drought failure was really due to stand establishment issue versus the soybeans struggling once they got further along in the season.
Okay, that makes sense. Next question is, where are you geographically located? I think this is from Mark. So Evansville, which is how far
between
south?
Janesville and Madison, 20 minutes from Madison, southeast.
And the next question is, are the markets that you feed into, are they available to most producers in Wisconsin, Minnesota? So maybe kind of the Chipotle market and the other markets that you sell into.
Yeah, the Chipotle market is contracted. Everbest Organics out of Munger, Michigan. Jim Saddleberg has the contract with Chipotle. Beyond that, Seneca we're using, on the canning crop side. We've done a lot with DeLong's. They've been really good at the organic corn market. Okay. Hopefully they're going to branch into a few other things at Clinton, maybe organic soybeans and some others. But that's where most of our products have gone. We do have a local market too at Super Soy. They're the extruded organic soybeans in Broadhead, which is close to us. But like I said, Lindley Mills in North Carolina bought our wheat, so it's kind of becoming a national market. And by the way, organic corn that does go to Longs gets ground up, put in a 2,000-pound tote, and shipped over to Japan to feed dairy cattle. So that's not even used here. So.
And I will say too, and I think I can say this because they approached me wanting to make connections with farmers, and you, Mark, and both Randy mentioned using canning crops in the rotation. The processors here in Wisconsin are looking for more organic acres, and I hear, as someone that has connections across the state, that across commodities there is a need for more organic crops, and this is a little tough with the transition years, but I think that the market may be a bit different with hay, which is a little bit of a struggle with the importance of that perennial phase in the rotation, although I think Mark and Randy have both given some really good examples about how you can, using other crops, diversify. And the key to organic is really diversification. And that's a challenge for farmers because you're looking at many different markets. But if you can get some of these great rotations that Mark and Randy have described with like 6 or 7 different crops, real solid cover crop phases, it may be less important to have that hay phase in. That hay phase is more important, I think, when you're looking at more of a feed situation of focusing on, corn and particularly corn, and then soybean. But these really great examples of very diverse rotations are really essential to maintaining that, the quality of those organic fields.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks for those answers. Next question might be one of our last, there's a few more, is also for Mark. So how many conventional acres you still manage, you still grow on? And I'll add to the question and say, why do you keep those acres in conventional and haven't transitioned in yet?
Well, we kind of cut our teeth in 2008 when Dad got diagnosed with mantle cell lymphoma and looking for a better way. And we actually had organic soybeans, some of our first crops, and we actually combined the weeds off the top of the organic soybean field. So we cut our teeth on 40 acres the hard way and figured out some of the systems that would work much better. And then we'll be fully organic in 2017, the spring of 2017, everything will be certified. We did add a year to some of our soybean acres there because we didn't have quite the cereal rye that we wanted. And of course I worked with the scout who's not organic, and he was scared to death of what was going to happen in some of these fields. So we actually sprayed them. Looking back, that's probably one of the things that I would do over. Beans are resilient, rye is unbelievably tough. We would be that much closer to fully certified had we not, taken a couple hundred acres and added another year to it.
Yeah.
So anyways, everything is in rotation to organic. We have some difficult fields that aren't tiled well, so it's going to be interesting to see how those work because we're all in at this point.
Great. We have 2 comments and I think one last question, and this is just another comment on why they plant first in terms of the roller crimping pattern. Is that they're able to control seed depth as it is not in the rye mat as we can get it directly into the dirt.
That makes a lot of sense, that you're also able to get better seed to soil contact by planting first. And our plans are to do some of this at 2 different sites in Wisconsin this year, up north in Spooner, Wisconsin, as well as at Arlington, to get a better handle and experience on how that works. But my understanding is, you go through, plant that soybean, the rye will come back up and grow, and if you hit the soybean at about the first trifoliate stage, again, just the resilience of that plant, you can run the crimper over it. Like anything, I'd start small, especially these are experiences I've heard from others, but my understanding is that it can work quite well and give you a jump.
One more comment for folks online and in class is that for anyone farming or working with farmers in Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, Nebraska, Clarkson Grain in Cerro Gordo, Illinois is looking to support transition a lot of acres over the next 3 years.
Wow.
So, and one last question for Mark online, and if people in class have more questions, we can ask them too. How much of your cost is for transport to market?
Very little, actually. If I think about what we've done, Clinton, Wisconsin, from where we are, is only 45 minutes down the road or so. And like I said, Lindley Mills, they picked up the freight for North Carolina on top of the price. So everything has been actually fairly close, and of course the canning company, they handle transport there too. So we haven't spent a lot. It's mainly been our corn and our soybeans. So when they're organic, we'll be fairly close too. Although we're probably going to go the food grade, and they'll probably end up in Minnesota. So we're going to spend some money there in the future. But yeah, you have to be prepared for that to go to wherever the market is. Certainly.
Any other questions in class? Go ahead,
There's
Deb.
a company marketing a row unit Roller-Crimper that mounts right on the planter.
Dawn,
Dawn,
Biologic.
yeah. I talked to them, they sound fantastic, but I'm just a little hesitant. I'd like to talk to somebody who had another opinion, so it looks like both of you have an opinion on it.
Well, I don't know I can't make an opinion. I'm very curious as well. I've
Yeah.
seen the equipment. I've talked to some people from Dawn. I'm hoping they might be able to bring one up to Arlington so we can try it. I'm really intrigued, not having experience with it, but yeah, I've been having some conversations with the folks there. It looks like an interesting alternative. It'll be interesting to see how that might differ from the road. And maybe there's different circumstances that one piece is more appropriate than the other. But yeah, I'm certainly intrigued as well about Dawn's design of the Roller-Crimper planter unit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it looks interesting as well. It's nice, to break up that roller into much smaller segments, but it would still be nice to let those units float a little bit. Now, whether or not we need all the tillage in the row, more to strip till and clearing the row, there's a lot of pros and cons to both sides of that from a weed control strategy, but it's nice to see somebody trying, and it looks very, very interesting.
I might have missed it, but rough ballpark on a 40-foot front-mounted Roller-Crimper?
Ooh, 40 foot. Gosh, I&J Manufacturing now, again, it's, I think, www.croproller.com. They have prices for each of their units, and we only have a 12 or 15 foot unit, and I think those run about 4,000 or 5,000. So 40 foot would be, I'm guessing, around 12, but they're all on the website.
I just looked at their website, their 40-footer trailer rear mount is about 18 to 20.
Okay, so it's a bit more expensive. Yeah, so as they get bigger, they're more expensive.
Yeah, when we looked at our crimper for a 40-foot, they said 80,000, and we bought this one for Right Way for 50.
Wow.
And not really going through all the specifics, we thought, wow, well, this thing's almost twice as heavy.
Yeah.
So it's got to work, right? Not necessarily.
Yeah.
Not necessarily. So.
Okay, well, a huge thank you to both Mark and Erin for sharing today, both research scale and larger farm scale. So tomorrow we have Brian Jensen, who works with integrated pest management here on campus throughout the state as well, and he will be covering pest management in organic systems. Some more entomology than plant pathology, but some of both. So kind of a primer on how to manage pests in organic systems. So tune back in, and thanks for engaging today. We'll see you tomorrow.